Will no jab, no job really become the reality? Could the UK follow America's biggest firms in demanding fully vaccinated staff? And what can and can't bosses do to employees who refuse to be jabbed? Hi, I'm ITV News presenter and reporter Faye Barker, and welcome to the latest edition of Coronavirus What You Need to Know. Well, I'm joined today by Kate Palmer, who's an HR advice and consultancy director at Peninsula. She'll be here to answer the key questions in what is such a controversial and contested issue. Hi, Kate.
Hi.
Now, listeners to this series will remember Kate from an episode back in June, but this is a topic that has become quite fast moving. So many developments have occurred, so we thought we needed to bring you an update. Are you, Kate, seeing lots of chatter in human resources about it? And where are UK firms at, really, with this issue?
Yeah, it's without doubt a prevalent talking point across UK businesses, particularly as is in the press amongst the care industry. Care workers regulated by the CQC have to be fully vaccinated by the 11th of November. That's been challenged. And then we've got a consultation out about frontline NHS workers in England and whether they should be vaccinated for both COVID and flu. But then wider and broader than that, general UK businesses, there are some implementing a no jab, no job policy. But alongside that, there's many businesses encouraging the take of the vaccine. So a real mix of approaches, Faye.
If we've got someone listening to this now who, for various reasons, may feel I don't want to be vaccinated, but I'm really worried I'm going to lose my job if I don't have it, what should be their first point of contact?
Speak to your employer. So there isn't over COVID. My general phrase was when I was speaking to a business with conflict with their employees: speak to them, understand why they don't want the vaccine. Understand what the emotions may be behind that, or the medical reasons, or the religious reasons. And then you can have a straightforward, hopefully, conversation with your employee about their stance. The ideal is you're kind of meeting in the middle, aren't you? And you come into a compromise. I know that's not always easy and it doesn't always realistically happen, but that would be my advice on a first port of call. Really talk about it and understand the position of both parties. And then hopefully the worries will be allayed, or not, as the case may be, but at least they'll know the position.
I mean, we talked at the start, didn't we, about big firms in the US much more strident in demanding their staff be vaccinated at the moment than the UK's leading companies. Some are even offering cash incentives to get the jabs. More than half of firms in the US are now expected to enforce a vaccine mandate by the end of this year. That's up from, it was 21% of firms currently. That includes the likes of Google, Facebook, and Disney. So what about people in the UK working for some of these global US firms? Where do they stand if their work demands them to get the vaccine, even if they're here in the UK?
There's a common test where you will look at someone in that situation to see under which law they're actually regulated. Does it come under UK legislation? And for the bulk of those you described, they will be regulated under UK legislation. The encouragement route is probably the preferable one for people who are employed in the UK by a US firm, because it could all get challenged and it could all unravel and it could be deemed discrimination or for unfair dismissal. So they are very likely to be regulated by UK legislation.
Well, interestingly, I do know of a case study effectively where, I'm not going to name names, but of a woman who works for a UK firm. That UK firm has a contract with a US investment bank. The US investment bank wants anyone who's on site in the London office to be vaccinated. The lady in question who works for a UK firm, as I said, she doesn't want to get vaccinated. There has been encouragement, but she still doesn't want to. So she is basically facing losing her job. What happens there? I mean, I think there is a line found somewhere, I think, which basically says other substantial reason why we can't have you working here.
Yeah, there's a few issues embroiled in that. I think it firstly comes down to the test of under what legislation this lady is ruled by, for want of a better phrase. It may be in those circumstances, in fact, Faye, that she does come under US legislation, and that's the root and at the core of the contract of employment, and hence any test of unfair dismissal would be under US legislation. Obviously not something I'm expert in, but if that was not the case, and in fact she was deemed to be regulated by UK legislation, the business that she works for could be taking a big risk, because if she went to tribunal for an unfair dismissal claim, she would win based on where we're at the moment. So they may well be taking a commercial risk based on the commercial relationship they have with this US firm, and it may be in their interest to align themselves to their way of thinking based on their commercial arrangement. That doesn't mean that negates risk for that employment relationship.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, it's almost like the UK firm would have to take on her case, I guess, rather than her doing it individually. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think for that UK firm, if that was my firm, the first thing I'd be determining is risk. You know, on what legislation is this person controlled? And if it was UK legislation, what they're doing, I'd be very wary of, because it could prove to be unfair, discriminatory. You know, it's not been tested. So that would be the first test. What is she regulated by? And if UK legislation, I'd be worried if I was that organisation.
I mean, it is worrying for people if, for whatever reasons you may have, you don't want to have the vaccine. I mean, we've seen UK firms like Pimlico Plumbers make a very public stand in recent months saying they would only hire vaccinated workers. I mean, are others in the UK looking to these sort of precedents that we have seen in the States? Or would you say generally our system here and our culture is just too different?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Pimlico Plumbers has been in the press a lot, and that is the extreme. You know, from experience and the businesses I've been speaking to, not seeing masses of people taking the no jab, no job policy. It's more along the lines of encouragement, persuasive discussions, addressing those individuals who really don't want to take up the vaccine, looking at the root cause of that, the reasons, and trying to address it on a case by case.
As we mentioned, you mentioned on the care industry and the NHS, I mean, obviously the vaccines aren't compulsory. They weren't necessarily written into people's contracts, although, as we say, that has changed or is changing in the care industry. So the government has had to change the law to force care homes in England to have fully vaccinated staff by November. That's in order to protect the elderly and the people in those care homes. Union leaders have criticised the move, with around 40,000 carers at risk of losing their job by refusing the jab, they say. So could we expect to see a rush of claims for discrimination and unfair dismissal?
Yeah, potentially we could. I mean, the government have made it quite straightforward in a way, in that they've legislated for this, and they've given the care industry a real clear route to dealing and handling with the matter. You know, there's a clear process to follow, clear dates. So a lot of the bulk of the dismissals they will be doing, if they have to do that, will be fair, because it's law. That where it could unravel, Faye, is where a care organisation has dealt with the process incorrectly. That's where we could see some claims at tribunal and winning if they've not done it right.
Despite changing the law over care home staff, the government has said for other firms looking to check whether workers have been vaccinated, the quote is they will need to consider how this fits with their legal obligations. So we've got some bodies like the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, or the CIPD, have warned, and I quote, enforced vaccination would be a criminal offence against the person and an unlawful injury leading to claims such as assault and battery. Now that sounds really sort of like, whoa. But to be honest, without help from the government in changing laws, is it likely firms can only encourage getting the vaccines rather than enforcing them?
Well, an interesting point with the care industry is the law that's coming into fruition is actually subject to a judicial review, a challenge right now. So it'll be certainly interesting to see what comes of that, Faye, because that's the challenges all around those types of things there you've described that the CIPD are stating. So we wait with bated breath on that, and that might dictate where the NHS frontline vaccination, mandatory vaccination consultation goes. So it is all a bit up in the air. I do kind of align myself to the CIPD's thinking in that it's very likely the safest, the fairest, the most unchallenged way will be encouragement. And that's the way I see it going, if I'm being honest, from what I've seen in employment law updates, bulletins, from what our clients are saying, from what the experts are saying that we liaise with. I think encouragement will definitely be the way forward. And we wait and see what these judicial reviews bring. I mean, if that, blows apart mandatory vaccination in the care industry, it's without doubt going to blow apart mandatory vaccination in any other industry.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I suppose it is a bit of a wait and see, isn't it, in terms of the law, just seeing what cases come up, how it's handled. I mean, and then I suppose that will dictate, won't it, how things go forward. I suppose looking at smaller businesses, people who are working in, say, confined spaces, what can bosses do in that situation where they have a member of staff who is refusing to be vaccinated, and then you've got other staff who are concerned about working alongside them?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think if it's an industry, a role where you can't, or it's risky to enforce mandatory vaccination, then you've got to look at it on a case-by-case basis. If you've got an individual that's refusing, you can't force. You've done everything you can within your control to persuade, but they're still resisting. That is that. So you need to look at what adjustments you could possibly put in place to reassure the other party, the other employee. Could you move into a different area? Could you be really quite stringent in keeping COVID measures in place, so you're 2 meter distancing, albeit it's not a requirement, you could still do that? Is there anything you can do to change shifts? I think you have to look to support the worried employee and abate their fears, really, and help them with concerns that they've got. But ultimately, you can't force that employee to have the vaccination.
Have you seen a bit of a sort of explosion in questions and cases coming up and situations? I suppose because we're getting a movement, aren't we, now in the last sort of, I suppose, few weeks or so, of more people returning to the office. Those who maybe were at home, I mean, that we've had people obviously working out and about throughout the pandemic, but specifically some of those jobs which have been able to be done at home, they're now perhaps being encouraged to come back to offices. So now all these questions, is that why they're all coming up now?
Yeah, definitely. There's been a distinct move since the end of summer, since kids going back to school. Quite honestly, Faye, I mean, you can only see the traffic on a morning is so much heavier. So many people have gone back to work, to the office. And I feel and see a general feeling of conflict in the workplace. People have such extreme views on vaccination and home working, but that general feeling of conflict is there, and conflict resolution we're supporting our businesses with a lot.
Yeah, interesting times, isn't it? How we're looking at how we all work. I mean, ultimately, what are your employment rights when it comes to vaccinations, or indeed anything else that isn't actually strictly written into your contract?
Certainly, it depends. So care and frontline, that may be very clear in that you don't have any rights, for want of a better phrase, unless you are medically exempt. That may become really clear over the next few months. We will wait and see. With regards to other industries, other roles, it is so context dependent. The Pimlico plumbers situation, they've got a business reason for insisting that is contractual to have a mandatory vaccine. Whether that will get tested, yet to be known. But ultimately, it feels quite fair. It will come out in the wash, won't it, Faye? But it's so, I wish I could give you a very clear answer, but it's so role specific, context specific, what your business rationale is for your mandatory vaccination position. And you have to kind of deep dive into each particular situation to get a really clear route forward. But clear is probably the worst phrase to use, because it's so not at the minute. And we wait on all these tests, judicial reviews. There'll be a flurry of cases around vaccination, and all of them will dictate how businesses should deal with it moving forward.
Okay, Kate, thank you so much for your expertise on all of those issues we covered there. Thank you for listening to. Do scroll through the podcast list for a host of topics. They range from how to handle needle phobia to the truth about vaccine fertility myths. Also, you can head to itv.com/news for all the latest on the vaccination programme. Until next time, bye for now.